It is cold outside, so let's paint some penguins. Hello, welcome to Wild Development Studio. My name is Lauren and I am on a mission to help people reconnect with nature through art, storytelling, and creative exploration. Today, let's paint some playful penguins. I'm going to teach you all about how to paint the penguin and also some fun facts about penguins. Once upon a time, I used to work with this amazing species and they're just so much fun and have such a unique personality. Let's dive in. All right, let's talk about what materials we're gonna need. I'm gonna give you a really quick list and then I'm gonna break it down a little bit more detail after I give you the list. We're gonna need our outline, watercolor paper, a pencil, a pen, a brush. I'm going to need a watercolor palette, paint, paper towel, masking tape, spray bottle, woo! And water. Just don't spill it all over your stuff. Awesome. So while our workstation dries and my outline dries, let's talk a little bit more about art supplies. I'm going with the Leda art supply and it's 140 pounds. It's a little bit more on the affordable side. So especially if you're a new watercolor artist and you're just looking to play around, definitely go with this. I love this one for this project because it was difficult to work with while I was painting because I kind of felt like the paint just sat there, and I'll show that in a video. But I just love all this little detail because we're just gonna do a wet on wet, place the color in, and then let watercolor do its thing. So I love the texture that it gave for this project. What I usually use is the arches, and that is also 140 pounds. It's really great for layering. It's very durable. I just thought it was a little bit flat. But you can use whatever paper that you decide for this project. Just know that it is very important. All right, next up, let's talk about pens. It is important that you use a good waterproof pen. I did outline here. I don't typically outline unless I'm nature journaling. I did so you guys can see the project a little bit better. And if it's not waterproof, it's gonna bleed and ruin your painting. So definitely make sure it is waterproof. For my brush that I'm using today, I'm using a number 12 round. I find that it's big enough that I can cover lots of space, but then it also comes to this nice point where I can get in and do a lot of the little details. So I only need one brush for this project, and that is the number 12 round. All right, let's talk about paints and colors that we're gonna use. It is entirely up to you if you want to use a realistic palette for your penguin or if you want to go with a more fun dark navy blue for your penguin. Play around, have fun with it. If you want to go for more realistic, what I used for this guy was Payne's gray and this crimson. And then for my artistic navy, I went with indigo and this cobalt violet. And then for the eye, I'm using a burnt umber and also a white gouache. That's a Winsor Newton white gouache. I'm gonna just show you guys real quick what they look like when they're on the paper. When you use your paints, when you put them on your palette, just spray them down, let them sit for a little bit, let them marinate so that they are activated. And I'll show you what these colors look like. So our Payne's gray is going to look like this. And make sure you wash off your brush in between when you're switching colors. My very first art class I taught, it was just intuitive for me. And one of my students was like, do we rinse our brush? Oh my gosh. Yes, I am so sorry I did not tell you that sooner. So there is the indigo, the cobalt violet, our burnt umber, and our white gouache. Obviously, it's not going to show up on white paper, so here it is on a little spot of black. So those are the colors that I'm going to be using. I am going to go with the artistic version because I have a lot more fun playing around with different colors than keeping it real. But, you know, it's good to do both ways. All right, so my outline still needs to dry a little bit, but how do we get this onto this? Well, there are a couple things that you can do. The first one is if you have a really good printer, you can put your watercolor paper into your printer and use the digital file and put it on your paper. Again, when we were talking about the Micron pen, we were talking about it needs to be waterproof. Same thing with your ink coming out of your printer. Not all of them are waterproof, so, you know, maybe print on a piece of paper, get it wet, and see how waterproof it is. You can see this ink here is not very waterproof. It was leaking a bit. So test it out. If you can't print it out, oh, also, if it's not a very high quality printer, your paper will jam. I know this from experience, so don't jam your paper into your printer. Look at your specifications on your printer before you do that. Another option is taking your outline, putting it behind your paper you're gonna work with, and have a light source on the back so that you can see through the pages and take a pencil and outline it. You can use the sun, or you can use something like a light box to help you with your outline. When you are tracing your penguin, it is very important that you have nice dry hands and you're not touching all over it, or as little as possible, because the oils in your hand can really mess with the paints and everything. Sometimes people will tell you if it is traced and it's not real art. And to that I say pooey, because if you want to paint, you are a painter. It doesn't matter how you got there. You could sit there and sketch it out, and it takes a long time. When I'm doing these edges here, remember penguins have feathers. They have about 70 to 90 feathers per square inch. And I do this part jagged because that's how it looks in real life, but also it helps to replicate the look of those really tiny little feathers. I mean, their feathers are probably like that big or so. And the outside layer of feathers helps to keep them waterproof. And then the inside layer of feathers, the downy feathers, help keep them nice and warm. I have to learn how to sketch and talk at the same time. That is an acquired skill. I feel like it is requiring both hemispheres of my brain. Oh, so while we're on the topic of hemispheres, this is perfect. Penguins, majority of them live in the southern hemisphere. And an easy way that I remember that is that Arctic means bear. And that's specifically referring to Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And again, the Arctic is bear in Greek, referring to those constellations, which are the bears. It's not really referring to polar bears, but in the North Pole, you get polar bears, and in the South Pole, you get penguins. If you ever see a cartoon and they've got penguins and polar bears together, that is not a real thing. That doesn't happen in real life. No. my sketch is, it's sketching. Usually I'm moving my paper all around to help me out. So, and if your sketch is not perfect, this is pencil. Don't worry about that. We're gonna go back over it with the Micron in a little bit, and we'll erase all of our pencil marks like that one I just made. But it is important to erase those pencil marks before you start painting. Something in the chemistry maybe, or there's some sort of reaction where once you get that wet with the paints and everything over the pencil, you're really not gonna be able to erase that pencil anymore. So you wanna make sure you erase those pencil lines before you start painting. So back to our penguin facts. Southern Hemisphere, there is one species of penguin that dances around the dances around the equator. That's the name for that line. See, I told you, it is hard to do these at the same time. So the Galapagos penguin will be right around the equator. And yes, for those of you that did not know, there are penguins that live where it's warm. And actually, this guy is a warm weather penguin. This is the Humblodt penguin. And a really easy way to tell if a penguin is a warm weather penguin is they have these open patches of their skin right here, and their feet are pink, and it helps them to release heat. So this guy, the Humblodt penguin, he lives around Peru and Chile. I used to work with the South African penguins. They have another name. I don't know if I can say it on YouTube. Think of another name for a donkey. Begins with a jack, ends with an A word. And my head is in the way, I'm sorry. This is my first time. But the South African penguin is called the Jack A because when they make a noise, their braying sound, it sounds like a donkey. So, fun fact about that. It is okay to hum to yourself while you are doing art. In fact, it helps you. So we almost have our outline done using the light box. So let me get the details in the eye and beak. So this beak, and I might talk about this again while I'm painting the beak, we'll see. The beak is made out of the same stuff as our fingernails, a keratin. So it's going to constantly grow their entire life. And there were a few times when I was working with the penguins that I had to help the vet tech bring the penguin and hold it so it can get the beak shaved down. It doesn't hurt them at all, just like it doesn't hurt you when you get your nails trimmed. So, ta-da, there is our penguin outline. I'm gonna probably fast forward while I outline this with the Micron, and this is the size 8. And then we will be ready to dive in and do the fun part, start painting. All right, now that we have our outline all done in ink, I'm gonna go ahead and take an eraser and just erase those pencil lines. And sometimes when I look at my sketch, I think, oh my gosh, is this gonna end up looking cute? And a lot happens when you add color to the page. It really helps to bring it all together and make it look more like an art piece. Also, something I noticed, I did my outlines backwards when I did my practice round. So that's a fun fact. Depending on which way you turn your outline when you're sketching it out, you can change the direction of which way your little penguin is facing. So just keep that in mind. I would redo it if I really wanted to be picky, but this is my first time doing a painting tutorial on YouTube. I've been putting it off for years, and you know what? You just have to do it. Imperfect is better than not doing it at all. So I'm happy we've gotten this far. A lot of work goes behind the scenes and prep. So I don't know. It's just, it's a whole thing. All right. So I've got most of those lines taken care of. All right, let's get ready to paint. This is the exciting part. All right, I am gonna squeeze out some fresh paint onto my palette. This is a butcher palette. I believe it's ceramic, so the paint sits on there really nice. If you use a plastic palette, it's gonna bead up. It can still work. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to work with. This is why I love watercolor. This is from my practice pieces. I can reactivate this and keep using it. If it was acrylic, it would dry up. You can never use it again. I'm not sure about oils. Probably with oils, if it dries up, you can't use it. I'm not familiar with that. So somebody in the comments, let me know. Watercolor is so easy on the go. So why I love it, 100%. So I'm going to use my Indigo and just freshen this up a little bit. You don't have to. I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you're getting set up. You just need like maybe a pea-size amount for this project. Going in with that cobalt violet. I'm not going to squeeze out any more burnt sienna. I've got plenty right there. I am going to add a little bit more of the white gouache. So gouache is similar to watercolor in that I can leave this on the palette, let it dry, and reactivate it with water. But it does act a lot more like acrylic in the sense that it can be opaque. So you can layer on top and you won't see what's underneath. So the reason why I'm using the white gouache is I mixed the white with the violet to make this light pink, and also for the highlight on the eyeball. Now, like for the paints that are currently dry, just spray with a little bit of water. We're gonna be doing the wet on wet technique for a lot of this. So you get a clean wet brush and put it on the page. And you're gonna want it to be kind of shiny. You don't want it wet, like dripping, but you want it kind of shimmery, satiny almost. And then you take wet paint, hence the wet on wet, wet paper, wet paint, and then put your paint in that wet area, and the paint goes where the water is. You saw how it's spread out before in the wet on wet area? In the dry areas, it's staying put. You don't want to do these big puddles. You can see how it's puddling up there. It's just not going to dry right, and it's gonna run. So you don't want that for this project, at least. But there is a time and place for having runny, fun paint. The areas that we're going to be focusing on first are these areas. So keep a mental note of where we're putting these colors. And again, it's your penguin. Wherever you want to put your paint is also fine. So I'm gonna get a nice little puddle of paint over here on the side. I don't want the straight, like really thick stuff that just came out of the tube. I want it to look milky like this. So I'm gonna start with this stripe along his belly first. And we're just gonna put water in there. It is tinted blue a little bit, but that is okay because that entire area is going to be blue. You don't have to get all this nitty gritty. Just get the main part wet. I'm gonna pick up some paint. We're gonna drop it in. See, this one doesn't spread like it does when I play with the arches, but that's just some getting used to. I'm gonna fill in this whole area that's all wet and wet. Then you can go in and start doing some of those details. I will probably fast forward that part because it's gonna take a minute. All right, guys, I am so sorry. I am having so many technical difficulties. I lost storage, had to clean that up, lost battery, died while I was filming. So while you guys were gone, we started with this one. You were with me for that. Can't remember if you saw this one or not, but so we did this one first, then we did this little area. Then we did the top of the head, same as we did this area, and then we did the back and the wing. Okay, so now you're up to speed. So sorry, but we got to drive on. Otherwise, it has taken so long to get to this point. There's so much that happens behind the scenes on all videos that you guys see. So we're gonna roll with it, okay? So what we're gonna be doing now is the little pinky areas around the eye and the beak and in his feet. So I'm gonna mix up some of this cobalt violet. You gotta get that nice and wet again. So you can use your spray bottle or you can just drop some water in there. You see it starting to activate. And I'm gonna mix a little puddle of just some water and that color in the middle of my palette. And make sure I'm still rolling. I told myself I'm gonna do it. We're gonna finally make a YouTube video, and you know what? We're learning from our mistakes and it'll be better next time. All right, so we got our white wash and we're mixing that with that cobalt violet to lighten it up a little bit, kind of make it look pinky. And add a little bit more water so it's a little flowy, just like that. And then I'm going to go in around the eye. So it's this area right here in the eye, and then also this little area inside the beak too, or very close to the beak. Good thing I got a round table so I can walk around it. You guys have the freedom to move your page around if you need to, but I gotta keep this still. So again, this is what really makes a warm weather penguin a warm weather penguin. They have that exposed skin around their face to help them cool off because in some areas where they live, it can get up to 90 degrees, like South Africa for the African penguins, and around the equator and the Galapagos penguins and Humblodt that live by Peru. You know, it's going to get pretty warm, which sounds great because it is currently about 5 degrees in the Cincinnati area. All right, so we got that area done. We're gonna leave it alone. We're gonna let it dry. Now we're gonna go into the feet. So I'm gonna lay a wash of pink inside the feet, and then I'm going to, while the paint is still wet, drop in some of this indigo, and it's going to help create this little dimension here. We are going to go back in later once it's dry and add a little bit more detail. And you can use a reference photo that's included to see where you want to drop in the paint, or you can just wing it, pun fully intended. But their markings in their feet and on their belly are all totally unique. So at the very end, we are going to splatter into the belly, or you can, you know, be a little bit more precise if you want. And it's unique to them like a fingerprint is to us. And that's how, when I worked with the penguins, that's how we were able to identify all of them, is by the spots on their bellies. And one of them only had one spot on the belly, so that was really easy to tell, and you know, really helps you out when you're working with them. All right, so what I did just there, I went over that line a little bit, and I just took a clean finger and swiped the paint away. You can use a paper towel too. You'll get a feel for it when you play around enough. Now the thing with this Leda paper I'm using, it does tend to dry a little bit quicker than Arches paper that I work with, but I do want to lay down all the color first because I don't want to have to be cleaning my brush back and forth too much. So I went in and put all the color down. I am gonna wet my brush a little bit, pick up a little bit more color, and just like right in the middle of that foot, I'm gonna add a little bit more paint, nice and wet, so that I can lay down some color. So this is wet on wet. So wet paint with wet paint on the page with a new color of wet paint, just to add a really cool effect. Adding some details and letting watercolor kind of do its thing. So I'm gonna lay down the color right along the toes. So boop, 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 like going down to the toes on each of them, because in between the webbing, there's a little bit of pink. You can kind of see how it's, because it's gouache, it's not mixing like it would with watercolor, but it still, I think, makes a really cool effect. Just kind of wiggle it back and forth. You can add little dots. You know, it's your penguin. They're all unique. And nature's not perfect. It's one of the reasons why I love painting in nature so much, is everything is very unique and not perfect. I don't enjoy painting buildings or houses. I can. It takes a lot more effort and work because I feel like I have to be so precise. It's just not as fun. I'd rather look at a cute little penguin. You could name your penguin if you want. And my son's favorite penguin was Blueberry. And he was very happy when I made the penguin blue because it was Blueberry the penguin. You can add some indigo outline, or whichever color you used is fine too. Some of the edges on the webbing have that darker area. It doesn't have to be perfect, just adding a little bit of pizzazz to their feet. And I am also going to go in and paint the toenails dark. You don't have to be too precise. And kind of paint them in dark and then blend it out. Don't get too hung up on the details. You notice that kind of stuff, but people viewing your art aren't going to notice as much. If you notice my penguin pillow I showed you earlier, you might not notice, it probably looked exactly the same, just at a quick glance, but that one took me a much longer time and had a lot more details. Hi, Georgie. Yeah, a visit from my doggy, George. They are getting some cabin fever because it's too cold for them to be outside and they're bored of being inside. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do the shadows by the wing. So this is, sun's hitting this way. We're gonna get a little bit of a shadow here and then a little bit of a shadow along here. First, I'm gonna do the shadow right here. So that's gonna be really dark. You want it nice and thick and just add a little bit of a line right there for your shadow. And then I'm gonna take that same amount of paint, just kind of dip it in the water, and we're gonna really water that down. So you want that to look like, maybe like tea instead of milk, right? And then I'm gonna lay a line right along the wing in that white area to make that shadow. You don't have to do this step. It helps to add a little bit of depth to your painting. You could even add some shadows along the feet. That's my husband's favorite part of my artwork, is when I add a shadow and when I add splashes and splatters and all that fun stuff. And be careful going over where you already painted. You don't want to overwork that area. You will lose that definitely. That's what makes the shadow look so cool right there, is that it looks like it's laying on top of the wing. I cleaned off my brush, added a little bit of water just to soften up that shadow a little bit. And then it is already kind of dark right underneath the head where the shadow would be, so that's good. And then while we have this tea-like indigo already mixed up, we're gonna go in with the beak and we're gonna add the first layer on the beak. That's what's cool about watercolor, is you can start light and work up your layers. So this is our first layer on the beak. And that beak is really sharp. There have been plenty of times I've been bit. They can't speak, so that's their way of communicating with you. And we'll say I worked at an aquarium. Don't just go out in the wild and pick up penguins. That will get you in trouble. So I was allowed to do it. But yeah, it is a very sharp beak because you got to think about it. These guys are catching fish out in the wild. They have to be able to hold on to that fish, and then they swallow it whole. And on the inside of their mouth, they have all these, they're like fleshy barbs and lining the inside of their like esophagus, and it helps to push that fish down into their belly. It's pretty wild looking. It almost looks alien looking inside of their mouth. Now, where I worked, their favorite food were silver sides. It was like penguin French fries, and they did not like the capelin as much. Okay, so we got our beak done. Now we're gonna go do the eyeball. So the inside is gonna be black. Or you can do indigo, that's dark enough, you could do that. Or you can take a little shortcut and use your Micron pen and color in that black part of the eye. That is okay too. And I am gonna get the inside of the eyeball wet. Oh no. Okay, lesson learned the hard way that I forgot about, so I'm trying to hurry. It is a waterproof pen, but you have to let it dry. You can see it kind of spread out a little bit. But that is okay, because maybe it'll give the eye some depth. Let's see how it goes. And then I can go back in with the pen and darken it up in a little bit. And I'm using the, oh, which color is that? The burnt umber on the inside of the eye. Again, doing that wet on wet, letting it spread. Add a little bit more water. So then what I do to help add a little bit more depth to the eyeball. So this is good and wet, first layer down. I'll get a thicker amount of paint. So maybe if that was like tea consistency, I'm going for milk or thicker than milk, like maybe right out of the tube consistency, maybe not that much. And you go around the edge of the eye. And then it's gonna kind of spread in and kind of make it look a little bit more natural. That's a quick and easy way to give that eyeball some depth. And then we'll add some highlights and shadow later, and then that really makes that eye come alive. The eyes are my favorite part to paint on any animal. So now the eyeball is done. We're gonna go back and do a couple more details on that beak. It should be nice and dry now. And we're gonna add another layer to the beak. Now, right here and here and a little bit towards the end, it's a little bit lighter. So we're gonna leave those areas light. And we're gonna go in with our medium color and leave those areas light. So we're not gonna paint inside there. Oop, I did a little bit, but that's okay. Because maybe this penguin, it's a little bit darker right there. If you ever get the chance to see a penguin beak up close, it is very, it's not all smooth, at least not on the Humblodt and African penguins. I think that was ice sliding around outside. And about 9 inches of snow the other day. But the beak is very rigid on penguins, warm weather species. So we're gonna try and build up some layers and help to show that. And if you're not comfortable doing layers, maybe just go in with a light to medium shade and color it all one color and draw in some lines, and that's fine. If you want to experience layering a little bit, that's fine too. Focusing on this beak is giving me Big Bird vibes. I love Big Bird. All right, so that's good for now. It looks a little ugly, but you gotta trust the process. Let that dry. And then I'm gonna go in and add a little bit more detail to the feet now that that area is dry. And again, going in with the more milky, the darker substance, and on top of each, let's say, digit, you got the webbing in between here, but on top of each digit, I'm gonna add some little lines, just like you see in your hands. You got those little lines there. And just be fun with it. You don't wanna be too, you don't wanna make all the lines parallel, because when you start putting order to things in parallel, it's going to, like that. If you're parallel like that, it starts to look less natural. And you know, you look at your own fingers, it's all kind of squiggly and moves around. Just some little tips to help you make your piece look a little bit more natural. So we're gonna do some squiggly lines, and then across, I don't know, is that the ankle? I guess that's the ankle. Their knees are way up in their, inside their body, surprisingly. So add those little squiggly lines. And then they also have little like spots and dots all over their feet. So add that now too if you like. See, look, I got a little too, my human brain's trying to put order to stuff, and I got a little too close together. There we go. All right, I'm happy with those feet. Now I'm gonna go back into the beak and add a darker layer on top of what we just did. And it is still a little bit wet, so it is gonna spread out, and I actually like that look. It kind of softens out those hot, harsh edges. Penguins do have nostrils, by the way. It's just kind of hard to see it on these guys. I do want to darken up the front of that beak too. I'm going to take a clean brush, clean wet brush, and a damp brush, and kind of go back over and blend this stuff out a little bit. I mean, and it does look crazy when you're like up close on it. That's the thing with art. Sometimes you gotta step back for it to make sense. Which is a lot like life sometimes. I went too hard on the blending, so I'll go back in and do some thick paint and add those lines back in. And again, these are all, it's made out of fingernails. It's going to be kind of, not fingernails, the same material as fingernails. So it's going to be jaggedy. All right, I'm pretty happy with that beak. It's looking like a cutie. And I'm realizing, because I got all thrown off, we didn't paint that part at all. And that's okay, because nothing is really wet around there. So we can go in and paint that now. Again, I mean, there are so many different ways you can paint your penguin, as far as which direction you want it to face, what color you want to make your penguin, what order you want to paint it in, what kind of spots and dots you want to put on there. I mean, there are so many different ways and styles and varieties, and that's kind of the cool part about it, because then it really makes it your own and it makes it yours. There, now he's looking more like a penguin and less naked. Just wondering why he wasn't looking right. He's so thrown off. It happens sometimes. Sometimes, I don't know, I feel like, oh, that's all right, the way it looked. Sometimes it's hard to discern. All right, I have all these things that are happening and it's really difficult. When do I give up? Do I keep pushing through and try and make it work? Or is something telling me I need to quit? But see, look, this is almost a little too wet and it's kind of pooling right there, but that's all right, it'll dry. I feel really passionately about art. I love art. It's a ton of fun, and I feel that we can learn a lot by studying animals through art, like the different markings on an animal to help you tell the difference between them when you're out studying with like a nature journal or painting like you are here. I mean, you will probably, once you've painted this guy, always remember that a warm weather penguin has this pink around the beak to help it cool down. So I really, my goal, my mission, help you slow down and reconnect with nature, to learn something, be curious about it, make something beautiful in the process. So I'm gonna keep going. We're gonna you know, you take the mistakes that happened and the lessons learned and you apply it to the next time. And maybe the next time is a little bit easier. And if it's not, and you're not enjoying what you're doing anymore, it's not fulfilling your needs anymore, then I'll come back and revisit. Maybe I shouldn't do it anymore, but you know, for now, this is pretty fun. Ooh, I like how it's looking on his face. I kind of leave it like that. I was kind of going in, doing little strokes, and it almost gives the impression of feathers. All right, so we're just about done. And you could be done at this point and let that dry, but I told you I was gonna help that eyeball come to life. This is what I do with a lot of my pet portraits and other paintings. I take a little bit of whitewash. Ooh, I gotta clean my brush off better. Some whitewash. And I'm gonna add a little like rectangle almost. I guess that's a square. That's a little darker than I anticipated. If you look at the eye, usually you can see a little bit of a reflection of light. So this is adding in that reflection of light, and I'm bringing that up a little bit high. Okay, and And so then you got that reflection there. And then I like to add one little darker speck of white. Maybe kind of close to the center. So we're gonna let that dry. I'm not gonna go over that dark white part, but where I have this kind of muted white, I am gonna put a shadow over top. And that's really gonna help add some depth into that eye. Make sure it's dry. You can really tell the face is still very wet. You can see that sheen, that shine on it. I think that top of the eye is dry. So when we did the shadow on the wing, we want that tea-like consistency. Maybe a little bit darker. And you can go on with your indigo. If you have like a Payne's gray or a black, you can do your shadow in black. I think it is more fun to do it in a different color. And just the very tippity tip of your brush, go in right underneath that eyeball line at the top. Maybe I need it a little bit darker. And add in the shadow on the eyeball. Nice clean dry brush and kind of help move the shadow down a little bit. And then you're never done with a piece of artwork until you have signed it. Oh, you know what? We didn't put any spots on our guy. So this is the fun part. You can get a little wild and crazy. So we're gonna mix up a bunch of milky consistency paint so that you can grab a bunch on your brush. We're gonna be tapping it to create spots on the penguin's belly. So like I said before, unless I got cut off before, all their spots on their belly are unique to them like a fingerprint, and you can just have fun. If there's a particular penguin you know and you wanted to add, like one penguin I knew had a little spot on his belly there. So if I wanted to, I could just go boop and then be done. But I wanna have a little fun with it. So I'm gonna take, make sure you're not laying down anything on an area that is currently wet like this is, but you can kind of shield it like this. Unless you want splatters on your penguin, and that's okay too. And I'm going to shield the top part of my penguin and boop, 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 boop on the belly. And if you got a little paint on an area you didn't want, take a clean paper towel and dab it up. If that didn't work all the way, then you can also take a clean damp brush and give it a little bit of a scrub and dot it down. And if it's being super stubborn, you could take something like this and really, it's called a level lifter, and gently scrub it. I'm not familiar with this paper, so I'm not going to experiment too much with that. What I am going to do is take my white gouache and cover it up. And I might play with it when it dries a little bit. Or don't worry. And you can make splashes all over your page. I just didn't want to do that with this one. Now you can sign your piece and make it complete. All right, guys, congratulations on finishing your penguin piece. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me. I will gladly answer any questions. I would love to see your finished pieces, so tag me at wilddevelopmentstudio.com or email me and I'll put it out on my socials, what you've created. Cannot wait to see what you've done, and I'll be posting more videos soon. I've got another penguin piece special for Valentine's Day coming up. Until then, get outside and see what develops. Stay wild.